Hey guys, welcome to Through the Bible Verse by Verse, a plain and simple study of the entire Bible, book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse. We are in 2 Samuel chapter 15 and 16. Absalom has put David on the run, and this, which will turn out to be an ill-fated coup attempt, but nevertheless, David is going to be on the run for a minute. And I think I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but partly because he's heartbroken, because after all, this is his son. And I think we should keep in note that Absalom, if he gets his way, will kill his father to ascend to the throne. Now, if you remember, one of the ways he used, that was a very shrewd way, that he stole the hearts of the people. Politicians can learn from this. And then some politicians still do, right? If you notice, what do? They promise you something, empty promises, right? If you hear something like, I'm going to build a wall and make Mexico pay for it. All right, I know that's anyway, but it was shrewd though. It stole the hearts of the people. Okay? And so Absalom did that, and so we're going to see now. Again, it is sad because part of what is going on with Absalom is that he has never been disciplined. He grew up in privilege, and then that privilege has given him an exaggerated sense of his importance, his wisdom. But anyway, I'll start back at verse 1 and read through. After this, Absalom got himself a chariot, horses, and 50 men to run before him. He would get up early and stand. Beside the road leading to the city gate whenever anyone had a grievance to bring before the king for the settlement. Absalom called out to him and asked, "What city are you from?" If he replied, "Your servant is from one of the tribes of Israel," Absalom said to him, "Look, your claims are good and right, but the king does not have anyone to listen to you." He added, "If only someone would appoint me judge in the land, then anyone who had a grievance or a dispute could come to me, and I would make sure he received justice." And when a person approached to bow down to him, Absalom reached out his hand, took hold of him, and kissed him. Absalom did this to all the Israelites who came to the king for a settlement. So Absalom stole the hearts of the men of Israel. And so this becomes the groundbreaking, right? The foundation of his coup attempt. Verse 7. When 4 years had passed, Absalom said to the king, "Please let me go to Hebron to fulfill a vow I made to the Lord. For your servant made a vow when I lived in Gershom of Aram, saying, if the Lord really brings me back to Jerusalem, I will worship him in Hebron." Now this is kind of it's not only dirty, but think about how evil this is. First and foremost, Absalom fled to Gershom because he had murdered his brother. David showed kindness to him for forgiving him for that murder. And so now he's using that as a ploy. Okay. Verse 9, "Go in peace," the king said to him. So he went to Hebron. Then Absalom sent messengers throughout the tribes of Israel with this message: "When you hear the sound of the ram's horn, you are to say, Absalom has become king in Hebron." Now, not to mention his father, remember, became king in Hebron. And there's a lot of things that Absalom's going to do, in a sense, to supersede, right? To remove the images of David. Okay, and this was one of this way. He starts off in Hebrew. Verse 11. 200 men from Jerusalem went with Absalom, and they had been invited and were going innocently, for they knew nothing about the whole matter. While he was offering sacrifices, Absalom sent for David's advisor Ahithophel, the Gileonite, from the city of Gilon. So the conspiracy grew strong, and the people supporting Absalom continue to increase. So this is not a small thing right here. In other words, you're going to see that David is going to take this very seriously. This thing is amassing. Now we're going to see as we move on, getting into the first and second Kings, which would be more political. You're going to see a lot of this sort of political wrangling that's going on, coup attempts, overthrowing of governments. So this is very serious here. Absalom's calculations, okay, so far are winning. As I said, had not God been on David's side, this would have worked in Absalom's favor. Now we'll get back to Ahithophel later on, but he was one of David's wisest counselors. Okay, that he, and again, for whatever misguided, let me stop. Well, I'll come back to him. Verse 13. Then an informer came to David and reported, "The hearts of the men of Israel are with Absalom." And David said to all the servants with him in Jerusalem, "Get up, we have to flee, or we will not escape from Absalom. Leave quickly, or he will soon overtake us, heap disaster on us, and strike the city with the edge of the sword." So he quickly recognizes this is not something we should dismiss. Remember, he had the heart of the people. And at this point, it would have been harder for David to try to regain that confidence in the hearts of people. So that was wise on Absalom's part. Not godly, mind you, because again, I think his critical mistake would be not seeking God. Verse 15. The king's servant said to him, "Whatever my lord the king decides, we are your servants." And the king set out, and his entire household followed him, but he left behind 10 concubines to take care of the palace. Now we're going to see this later on here. This is sad as well as it is ruthless. But we'll see later. Verse 17. So the king set out, and all of the people followed him. They stopped they stopped at the last house, while all his servants marched past him. Then all of the Cherethites and the Pelethites and the Gittites, 600 men who came with him from Gath, marched past the king. Now, kind of interesting, if you remember, before David, when David was on the run from King Saul, he had 600 men. So these men stayed with David. Verse 19, the king said to Ittai the Gittite, why are you also going with us? Go back and stay with the new king, since you're both a foreigner and an exile from your homeland. Besides, you only arrived yesterday. Shall I make you wander around with us today? While I go wherever I can, go back and take your brothers with you. May the Lord show kindness and faithfulness. But in response, Ittai vowed to the king, as the Lord lives, and as my Lord the king lives, wherever my Lord the king is, whatever it means, life or death, your servant will be there. Now, I want you to file this statement here, this action by Ittai the king. Now, it is interesting because you see he's a foreigner, as David is saying. And notice his vow of faith, not only to David, but that he embraces the God of Israel. Okay? But more than that, I want you to take note that when David tries to send him away, he says, no, I'm going to stay with you. This reminds me of Ruth. If you'll remember Ruth, that she said the same thing to Naomi. Okay, and it is interesting, her faith in God. Verse 22, march on, David replied to Ittai. So Ittai the Gittite marched past with all his men and the children who were with him. Now again, I want you to also keep note of this, because to me, this is going to be sort of a test, a pattern for those who are loyal to David. I want you to just file that and keep that, because we're going to see this later on. And just, as we move on through these few chapters, of Absalom's coup. And it's going to come back to bite a certain person, but we'll get to that later. Verse 23, everyone in the countryside was weeping loudly while all the people were marching past. And as the king was crossing the Kidron Valley, all the people were marching past on the road that leads to the desert. Zadok also was there, and all the Levites with him were carrying the ark of the covenant of God. They set the ark of God down, and Abiathar offered sacrifices until all the people had finished marching past. And the king instructed Zadok, return the ark of God to the city. If I find favor in the Lord's eyes, he will bring me back and allow me to see both it and its dwelling places. However, if he should say, I do not delight in you, then here I am. How can I do? He can do with me whatever he pleases. Now this is kind of interesting, because keep this in mind. Even though, remember, as we're reading the Bible, we're the behind the scenes revelation that's going on. Picture this now as as David now is in his eyes, in his shoes. And remember, he didn't get these revelations that we see, these great revelations from God every day. They came very sporadic. And at this particular point, so he said, I don't know what God is going to do with me. You could probably also add to the fact of guilt, his sinful guilt, that maybe God is punishing me. And my point is, he just really doesn't know. Well, is Absalom going to prevail? He doesn't know. God, of course, as we know from insight, God is going to cause him to prevail. Verse 27. The king also said to Zadok the priest, look, return to the city in peace with your two sons with you, your son Ahimaaz and Abiathar's son Jonathan. Remember, I will wait at the fords for the wilderness until word comes from you to inform me. So Zadok and Abiathar returned the ark of God to Jerusalem and stayed there. When David was climbing the slope of the Mount of Olives, weeping as he ascended, his head was covered, and he was walking barefoot. Each of the people with him covered their heads and went up, weeping as they ascended. Then someone reported to David, Ahithophel is among the conspirators with Absalom. And the Lord pleaded, please turn the counsel of Ahithophel into foolishness. Now we're going to see this. Ahithophel, again, was one of the wisest counselors of David. And we're going to see this here. Notice this prayer. Turn his wisdom. In other words, the foolishness of Absalom. We're going to see this later. He will not take the counsel of Ahithophel. But we'll see that later. Verse 32. And when David came to the summit where he used to worship God, Hushai the Archite, who was there to meet him, with his robe torn and his dust on his head. David said to him, "If you go away with me, you will be a burden to me. But if you return to the city and tell Absalom, I will be your servant, my king. Previously, I was your father's servant, but now I will be your servant. Then you can counteract Ahithophel's counsel for me. Won't Zadok and Abiathar the priest there be with you? Report everything you hear from the king's palace to Zadok and Abiathar the priest. Take note, the two sons, Zadok and Ahimaaz, and Abiathar, son of Jonathan, are there with them. Send me everything you hear through them." So Hushai, David's personal advisor in Jerusalem, Hushai, David's personal advisor in Jerusalem, just as Absalom was entering the city. So it's kind of interesting that David had sort of the wisdom to kind of put this in play here, right? To kind of set up spies as you were. All right, let's go a little further. Chapter 16, verse 1 says, "And when David had gone a little beyond the summit, Ziba, Mephibosheth's servant, was right there to meet him. And he had a pair of saddle donkeys loaded with 200 loaves of bread, 100 clusters of raisins, 100 bunches of summer fruit, and a skin of wine. The king said to Ziba," listen to this, "Why do you have these?" Ziba answered, "The donkeys are for the king's household to ride, and the bread and summer fruit are for the young men to eat, and the wine is for those to drink who became exhausted in the desert." Verse 3, now pay attention to this. "Where is your master's grandson?" The king asked, "Why is he staying in Jerusalem?" Ziba replied to the king, "For he said, 'Today the house of Israel will restore my grandfather's kingdom to me.'" The king said to Ziba, "All that belongs to Mephibosheth is now yours." "I bow before you," Ziba said. "May you look favorable on me, my lord the king." Now, Ziba, if you remember, I said when he was appointed to rule, to serve Mephibosheth. Now, remember Mephibosheth, sorry about me butchering these names here, was Jonathan's son. And remember, there was a time when David said, "Who among, are there anybody left from the house of Saul that I can show kindness to?" And of course, Mephibosheth, as a look, when David was on the run, or actually when Saul died, Mephibosheth was being carried by a nurse. She dropped him and crippled him. David said, "You're going to eat at my table, and all that belonged to your grandfather's house, all of Saul belonging, all his land is going to be restored to you." Now, what is interesting about this is that Ziba, remember, was a servant. That he did not have any other kind of hope in life other than the fact that he was a servant. But you see now the shrewdness now that he actually is telling a lie on Mephibosheth. But however, and we'll get to this later, Mephibosheth, I'm sorry, I'm butchering this here, his name, he in my opinion makes a grave error, which I'll get to later. When he says when David asked, now understand, now remember I said, remember with Ittai, who no matter how David tried to push him away, he says, no, I'm sticking with you, right? So contrast this to now, all of a sudden when David asks, where is Mephibosheth? Where is he? So that lets you know that was on David's mind. Ziba lies, and so in this time, David says, all that belongs to Saul. Now, the question is, was this right? Was this wrong? Was David wrong for doing this? And in some respects, it's hard to tell. We'll get to that. We'll get to this later. But we'll get to this later. But remember, this is a very it's a time where we're going to see that people are showing their true colors. And David at this point needs to see this, but he doesn't. All right, we'll pick it up in chapter 16 next time, guys. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Hit the subscribe button on there. And don't forget to like and share these videos. Look, I'll see you in the next study. See you then.